Now we're ready. Go.
All right, so we're recording now?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody, to the latest Ursula Meyer Advocacy Training Fund Program to the California Library Association. The initial slide here is about the wordiest thing you're going to see from me all day. I'm going to leave this up for roughly 30 seconds, primarily for those people who are watching the archive video and may be curious about the series. I'm going to stop talking long enough for you to read this, then we'll get off of that and go into some slides and then into a highly interactive session. So I'm going to stop long enough for the reading. Those of you that are already down at the bottom of the first paragraph there, we have consistently started at 10 a.m. Pacific time on the second Wednesday of each month. There is a good chance that our September session, which is going to be the advocacy basics session that we did at the California Library Association, that will probably start at 11 a.m. But watch for announcements on that. We'll put that out in plenty of time. Mostly it's 10 a.m. start time. Now, having said that and having showed that, let us get the show on the road and move into the idea of what we're talking about today, advocacy, storytelling in libraries. To me, the whole spirit of storytelling is to engage people, and we want to know how to engage people. I think that it starts with actually demonstrating what we're trying to talk about here, the idea of telling the story to draw people in. One that comes to mind for me, and I've told repeatedly ever since COVID started, was the idea that before COVID, of course, everybody was running around wherever they wanted to go very comfortably and interacting face to face. And then when COVID came, the tremendous shutdown was more than anybody expected in terms of isolation and the loss of some of the resources that we all have. A clear and present issue for all of us throughout the pandemic, and it's continuing now, of course, was broadband access. Once COVID shut down libraries and shut down many other places that were providing that, people were struggling for work and for learning. One day here in San Francisco, about 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, I was walking by a local branch library, which I used to use when it was open physically to the public. As I walked by, I noticed a person sitting in the bushes with a laptop. Being curious, being a nosy body that always wants to know what's going on, I walked up to the person and said, "So are you using the library Wi-Fi?" And the person nodded yes, and it hit me as I was watching that. As much as I had during that period of time been working on initiatives to promote universal broadband for work and learning throughout the United States, it didn't become personal until I was walking by that person face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and saying, here in the center of what everybody thinks of as technology land, we have significant numbers of people that still can't get onto the internet for work and learning and other things because they don't have that basic connection. And that's what we want to do with the storytelling that we tell for advocacy. Clearly, at that point, I was trying to get my chops up to be an advocate for broadband, but until I had that moment of seeing and feeling what that person was feeling the empathy that goes with an experience that you just can't avoid in that kind of a situation, it didn't feel real. And that's what we want to go for as we look at our stories today together. Daniel Goleman, in a book that was written about 10 years ago, the book Focus, A Hidden Driver of Excellence, makes a really good point about what is at the heart of storytelling. I'm going to stop long enough for you to read that quote from the book up here on the screen. This takes us into neuroscience land, but not too deeply, mind you. It's the idea that what makes storytelling work is that there's an empathy, an immediate connection. In slightly technical terms, people refer to it as the mirroring effect. If somebody's doing something and you are engaged with what's going on, you actually start to mirror their behavior, or they start to mirror yours. We can see that in conflict resolution. Somebody's screaming at you, you start to scream back just because you're mirroring their bad behavior, and it takes you into a moment of their behavior is affecting you and your response affects them, and it gets worse and worse. In advocacy, as I was trying to make the point a minute ago, when we can stop thinking at a theoretical level of saying, well, we want you to do this because you lead to this, this, and this, and we list all the rational points, that's okay. But what Goleman's pointing out here is that the deeper thing we need to be aware of is what happens when a good story engages somebody. You feel like you're in it. Think of the best movies you've seen where you lose time for an hour, 2, 3 hours, however long the movie goes on. And at the end of it, it's over and you go, wow, that was 2 or 3 hours. But you actually, at some way, feel transformed by the experience. You know these people were fictional characters, and yet you felt like you knew them. For those of us who weep at the drop of a handkerchief, we find ourselves tearing up over fictional characters because we were engaged. And that's that whole idea of the brain study, the fact that we start to mirror what we see. And if we're aware of that and we use it to our advantage, our storytelling skills really pop up effectively. I want to take an example here of something from the California State Library in terms of storytelling and what we might do. It's the Lunch at the Library program, and I would encourage any of you who are involved in grant writing or any other type of thing where you're trying to be an advocate for a project to, after today's session, go and look up Lunch at the Library on the California State Library site. It's magnificent in terms of them giving you the stats, the figures. You can see that on the left side of your screen if you're seeing what I'm seeing here. And the numbers are really impressive. The site also gives you plenty of ideas of how to go out and promote a Lunch at the Library program and be an advocate for it. But when all is said and done, we're missing the point here of what Goldman's talking about, where the mirror impact kicks in. If you go further into the site, instead of looking at that, you look at, and he says, as he's trying to move his slide forward, you look at this, and all of a sudden you go, wow, that means something. We're not looking at numbers anymore. We're looking at people. The thing we want to be able to do here is engage ourselves so actively that you walk away thinking, lunch at the library, kids that might not have had a decent meal, getting a decent meal because we advocated for that, state government approved that, libraries are participating in that, and we literally want to be able to put ourselves into that picture, as I'm kind of playfully doing it, saying, wow, I can be among those kids here at lunch at the library and just see what they're doing and be one of those happy faces. That's the power of storytelling. And that's what we want to get to. So we're looking at each other again. We're talking about the basic things that make us mirror stuff and make us effective with people. Let's prime the pump by getting you involved in this, either through the chat window or by unmuting yourself. Talk, please, about one story that you want to tell to foster positive changes within your library and the community you serve. Let us think of some of the essential elements of this. You don't want to tell a 20-minute story. My challenge to you is to try to tell the story that you want to tell about a positive change you're advocating for within your library or your community with 5 or 6 sentences max. It's like your rough draft of that story. Feel free to put it in the chat, or to keep this more lively and engaging, unmute yourself and tell everyone in this particular community of learning this morning, what's the story you want to tell to foster positive change? This will become a framework for you at an individual level throughout today's session to work on that, refine it, and walk away with a stronger draft. So at the end of this, you say, okay, I'm done with you. Let me go tell this story and let me work as an advocate to see how much further down the road we can take this. Any takers? Anybody want to be the first to tell a story to foster positive change in your library or the community you want to serve, something you're working on? Okay, I know the pressure is always awful to be the first to do something. So let's just skip that stage. The old joke that I've told many times. Let's go to story number 2. We'll forget story number 1. Who wants to be second to tell a story about something in library advocacy? Notice what's happening here. Sense of humor that we're trying to engage in what we do together. That's an essential part of your storytelling too. Go with the flow, run with things when they're not quite going the way you want. Now let's get some of those stories out. Anybody? Okay, I'm starting to see some stuff coming to the chat. I love Sarah's comment in chat. Well, sometimes our patron comments tell the story best. And in fact, that is an essential thing to think about when you're telling stories. There's a lot of research that says the best stories are the stories we tell, but there's just as much in advocacy that says if you are recognized as being a paid member of library staff and you're going to your local legislator or you're going to somebody else on behalf of the library, it's seen as a little bit self-serving and you don't have the credibility with them in terms of being able to convince them of stuff as if you brought in somebody else. So the very point Sarah's making about having patron comments tell the stories, if you're doing a legislative visit via Zoom or face-to-face, if you can get into the state legislator to see your legislator, or even in that person's local office, having what my good buddy Deborah Doyle, who's on the California Library Association board and with our legislative committee, says, bring a civilian. That ups the ante. And what we hear is having those people telling the stories with you is what adds to your advocacy skills. So thanks for pointing that one out, Sarah. Laura's comment here is I'm trying to get an English conversation group started as a volunteer initiative to be led by volunteers rather than library staff. Laura, do you need funding for that, or is that something where you just need to get a community of volunteers involved? Okay, so you just need the volunteers on that. Remember, as you tell the story, that you want to look at the results and work your way back from that. If we go out and we say, oh, I want to start a volunteer program and have people telling stories, it's like, well, that sounds sweet. And some people will be ready to jump in with you immediately. But if you started off with stating a problem and the second sentence is how what you're about to do makes a difference, then you're on the right track. Now, I can give you an example of that, but really, I want to go for interactivity here. Let us as a group think quickly through that challenge that Laura's getting out there. Get an English language group started as a volunteer initiative, to be led by volunteers rather than library staff. What's a positive impact on the community if that program goes into place? Anybody, including Laura? And strongly urge you, if you have a microphone and you're comfortable doing it, unmute yourself and let's get some conversation going around that idea. Let's brainstorm this a bit. What would the impact be on a community of getting an English conversation group started? Great. Laura's come in with one idea here. The ESL, English as a Second Language learners, can practice their English in a safe space conversationally. And this gives us a chance to advocate at two levels. If we're trying to get that program out, we're saying, we can provide a safe space for you. And that's generically for people that may not realize what the library offers. They can say, we're providing a safe space and we are connecting you to other people in your community. So you want to start looking not for the benefits to the library, but as advocates, you want to look for the benefits to the community you serve. Oftentimes we're very self-centered about this whole process, saying, coming to the library, we have tens of thousands of books, we have access to the internet, we have DVDs, we have storytelling programs, but we don't think about what that means to people. And if we flip that, and so as we see in some of the best advocacy and marketing that's out there, it starts off with saying, want to hear a story free of charge? Come down to the library. Want to see a baby dinosaur read you a story about dinosaurs? Come down to the library. Want your child to be exposed to the joys of reading with other children and understanding the resources that are out there? Come down to the library. It starts with us saying to them what the benefit is and having them come in. I often talk about how we draw people into what we do. And I quote a good friend of mine who's a consultant, Sardik Love. Sardik always says when a new client calls him and says, can you do something for me? His initial question is, what's your pain point or what hurts? And that's a good question for us to ask as advocates. We're going to advocate for something. The first question is, what's causing pain to somebody? And what can we do together to alleviate that? That leads us to the kind of stories that really take us into drawing people into a cause like an ESL program for the community and the impact that it has on them. Do you have any other comments have come in yet on that particular one? Chelsea suggesting community members will improve their English skills. So now we've got the beginning of a story. And Laura, I'm looking at so many names here. I want to make sure I'm talking to the right person. Yeah, it's Laura's project. So Laura, if you're grabbing notes here and jotting down things, you're starting to get your own pitch, thanks to the wisdom of this particular crowd. Want to come into a safe space where you can improve your English skills? Our library offers that to you free of charge. And if the pitch is to get the volunteers first, say, want to help us create a safe space in the community where we can help people improve their English language skills, you as a volunteer can make a difference. Again, you're always saying what the result is going to be, and you're putting it in the most positive terms. The Goldman book that I've been reading, Focus, goes into that whole thing also, talking about the positive versus the negative. I hear a lot of advocates say that if you want to ramp people up, get them excited about some major problem, get them upset, and then have them rant a bit and get the rallies going and see what results you can get out there. It's a standard thing we do in advocacy. And Goldman suggests, not in terms of advocacy, but in terms of anything where we're trying to get people engaged, If we take a positive approach to things, we are much more likely to have long-term positive effects rather than dwelling on the negative things and just getting upset and feeling like nothing ever changes. So these are all tools we can use, the combination of being positive and also getting people worked up enough about a problem. But if we focus more on the problem than the solution, I think we miss an opportunity that's starting to come out very much in the chat here from people saying, here's what we can do. And I've seen something here from somebody, Karen. It looks like mics are still muted for people while we're talking. Can you go back in and check the setting of it? Maybe this is why we're not hearing from anybody, that the generic setting you and I hit is affecting everybody else in the group. So Karen, if you can go back and change that so that the mics are unmuted for all participants, that would help. Thank you for pointing it out. I'm sorry it took me a few minutes to see that, everybody. And let's see, we'll continue on.
They are muted. Mute, but then my option is to mute all. So I'll mute all and then I'll unmute all.
Yeah.
Yes. And then allow them to unmute themselves. Yes. It says I have to ask them to unmute. You can now send nonverbal feedback. Yeah, they're still muted, but I don't know. It won't let me unmute them. What's going on? Host is not allowing participants to unmute. This is a message received. Ask to unmute. Okay, that's Chelsea.
Yeah, that worked for me.
Chelsea, right?
Yep.
Dorothy. Okay. Well, Dorothy. Okay. All right. Beverly. Jamil. I don't know how this happened.
While we're waiting, I'll talk about last night, the library board was presented with a little publication from their literacy program. And it was the participants got to just write a small blurb about how important literacy was to them. And so just that, tangible object turned out to be a cute little book. Everybody connected with the story. It was a good thing.
Thus far, I've asked everyone to unmute, so should be okay now. Is anybody there?
Yeah.
Still can't unmute. Let's see. Still getting the settings, not able to unmute. I never even touched anything, so I don't know what's going on. Anyone else stories like Beverly? Not Laura, so Laura. I'm gonna go back to Laura. John is the only one that looks like he's not muted. The craziest thing. Okay, Chelsea should be okay. Chelsea, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
This is Rachel. I think I was able to unmute.
Okay, yes, I see you are. Sorry, I don't know what happened, but I'm unmuting everyone. I'm asking. Okay, Salvador should be fine. Michael. Michael. Sorry, what a waste of time this is. Mm-mm-mm. No, it looks like everybody's muted again. Well, anything you can do on your side as a co-host?
Hi, excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what's happening is you're prompting the unmute all participants and it's giving us a prompt to stay muted or to unmute ourselves. I'm able to speak now, but then once I hit my mute button again, it locks me back out. So then I would need an additional prompt from the host to speak a second time after this. That's what's happening on my end. I see a few other people in the chat are sharing that as well.
Clicking on ask to unmute. Okay. And it's like it's not unmuting. It's unmuted. This is the strangest thing. Paul, are you muted? Paul, you're there now, right? Nope, muted again.
Okay,
Yay.
muted. Karen, you'll need to keep an eye on this. If anybody else unmutes, then it's going to mute me. So if we do go back and forth and somebody else tries to speak, just make sure that my little red image doesn't come up there. And I'm sorry, folks, we've not had this problem before. We've done this series for almost 2 years now. So Karen and I will go back and have some firm words with Zoom afterwards. But unfortunately, if we want to make this thing fly and keep this as interactive as possible, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your comments in chat. And I'm sorry for the loss of the interactivity audibly here, but that's where we're at. So let me go back and see where we were just before the Zoom gods decided that we weren't going to all mute or unmute together. We were talking, I think, about Laura's situation there, and it looks like some other things have come into the chat. So let's pick up right where we were. And I think we were just trying to get to the thing that Jeffrey had offered in terms of it also increases diversity. So what we're seeing here in terms of how you build a story is first decide what the benefit is to the people that you're reaching out to. Second thing is tell them how they can participate. I strongly, in every presentation I do like this, encourage people to use the word we instead of I or you. We together can increase diversity in our community. We together can help people speak English in a way that helps them to communicate. A wonderful evaluator here in library land many years ago, Rhea Rubin, who did a lot for the American Library Association, used to ask a question in terms of evaluation of what was the real impact. And she would keep asking until you got to the personal side of it. A quick example of that, we oftentimes talk about how many books we circulated in a year. And Rhea's come back to that would be, so what? At first you're taking it back, well, we circulated all those books. She would say, so what impact did it have? Well, people who couldn't afford books got them, so what? So they were able to read stuff. So what? And it would get down to somebody who was ill with cancer, got a book or an online resource that helped them to deal with that situation, or somebody who was looking for a job, got a resource through the library, and they got an interview that led to employment that they might otherwise not have had access to. That's the level of thinking that we want to do before we even start to tell our stories. Think about the impact on others. In the back of our mind, of course, is we're working for a library or for libraries, library consortia. And so we want to think about what's in it for the library. But our main focus in storytelling and advocacy particularly is always the impact on the largest part of the community you can, and keeping it personal, as we saw in that wonderful picture of Lunch at the Libraries with those children in a library having a meal. So again, going back to Laura, does that give you a starting point for your story, Laura? Good. And everybody else, remember, that wasn't just about Laura's story. That's something that you can adapt for your own, looking at what you've got. Let's look back over chat. I think there were a couple of other people that were talking about stories. And again, let's set a baseline of what kind of stories we can tell and how we can approach them, and look at some of the techniques there. There is one here, and I'm just trying to get back to it. Dorothy. Oh, she already had talked before the session about the grant writing. I think you're probably starting to see here that if you're going to put stories into your grant proposals, a good story up front talking about the impact that the funding or the in-kind gift or whatever it is you're asking for catches somebody's eyes. If you start off saying, I'm asking for $100,000 to buy this many books for our community, there's not the emotional engagement. We don't have that Daniel Goleman mirroring effect yet. But if we say there are thousands of children in our community, including this one who lives in this area and goes to this school and doesn't have access to books, if we had this money, that person could get the kind of book that would increase her ability to learn and to be a better member of her community, ultimately adding to her civic engagement. Whatever lofty terms you want to speak in, get a person out there, get something we can feel good about. Say, oh, if I give to this, I'm partnering with you to do something. These are the kind of things we want to look for in our storytelling. Not that hard. It just takes a change of focus and thinking about what the impact is on others beyond ourselves. Let's see if there's anybody else. Somebody managed to unmute themselves and wanted to say something there. I'll stop long enough to see if that works. Now I think I'm just hearing my own voice come back to me. That's an awful thing. All right, so another one from Dorothy. A recent story for SLO Library is our equity-based project of establishing a tool library in the small rural community of Shandon, California. Good. Two things here. One, it's not all about urban libraries. What we're talking about works in urban and rural libraries. It doesn't matter whether you got 1 million people in your area or 5,000 or 10,000. Colleagues that I have across the country, including wonderful David Lee King from Kansas, they talk about how they meet the community needs by going where the community is. And long before COVID hit, they had a virtual library to meet the rural needs, the library needs and information needs and entertainment needs of their community. So people didn't have to drive all the way into them. That's part of what we're looking at. But let's look at the specific story from Dorothy about the tool library. And again, let's brainstorm in the chat. What would be the pain point we are trying to alleviate? And what's the positive impact of having a tool library? Anybody, including Dorothy. See if we can start to cobble that story together real quickly together.
Yes,
Doing that. Let me
pain,
there. Yes.
I guess the pain point would be not having access to these tools because, you know, tools are expensive and they take up space.
You're halfway there. Keep going. So they're expensive, they take up space. And what happens if you don't have them?
You can't do the jobs you need to do. You can't, you know.
And get specific.
Yes.
What jobs might you not be able to do?
Well, if you need to, like, I guess, you know, build some cabinets in your house, you know, you won't be able to, you know, build the cabinets, or if you have, you know, leaky faucet or plumbing, you wouldn't be able to do that. And you might, you know, your basement might, you know, flood or whatnot.
That's wonderful. So now we are starting to craft it, and we just flip that a little bit and go one step further. And I think we've got the first draft of the story. Ever had trouble doing repairs in your home? Leaky faucet, toilet that's broken, and you could do it, but you don't have the tools? Well, now you do. Our library has them free of charge. And if you come down, we'll help you to get those tools. And then you can do that work and save your money and your facility, your house, whatever it is that's about to be damaged. That's the idea of just getting people in and going, oh yeah, that's me. I feel that. We want in our advocacy storytelling to immediately have somebody look at us and say, I feel that. That's me, and I'm going to join you because I want to make a difference. Wonderful way that you just described that. Thank you so much for walking through that with me. Anybody else want to add to that? What else might you say if you're trying to advocate for a tool library in terms of what needs it meets for the person who's out there that wants to use your tools? Well, Laura's put in another one. This is great. Plus, you can use the library's computers and watch a YouTube video that will help you to complete the task. The more you can get into that, the better you are. And again, if you're going out and you're asking for legislative support in your local community for your library to actually fund a tool library, you bring a couple people and a couple of the tools to a meeting. You say, see this hammer? The library had this. See this person? They borrowed it and they fixed that. That's what this means. And your dollars go to making that difference. Legislators love to know the difference that they make. We all get so cynical about the legislative process and the divisiveness in our country, but nothing makes legislators and constituents happier, I hope, than seeing that a problem was solved and somebody was happy. That's what we want to try to do through advocacy. See, Karen's adding in the idea of bicycle repairs. And again, if you're doing a slide deck, which again, you can tell from the way I'm running the session, I don't think slide decks are essential. I think the real essential element is us connecting with one another, listening and working together. But if you're going to go the route of doing a slide deck, have a person with you, have them do a little bit of the presentation and have the images behind you. Forget the slides that are full of text, like our opening slide for this presentation. That's there very deliberately to introduce people to the series. But once we get into it, as you notice with a couple of slides I used, images behind you that complement what you're saying. Don't just repeat it, but to complement what you're saying, like you're talking about all the tools out there. Have a picture from your library of all the tools and have that behind you as you're talking about your tool library. Have a picture of somebody doing a repair or working in their garden or doing something else, fixing their bicycle. It humanizes it. Advocacy is about humanity. It's about connections. That's where we want to go with this. Sarah's got a comment in there. We can borrow an extra set so our kids can learn. Oops, comments are coming so fast and furiously now that they're jumping on me. We can borrow an extra set so our kids can learn working on a project with us, team up with Habitat to Humanity and help build more homes for your neighbors. Let's see if there's any others on that same theme. Chelsea's got one. If you borrow a chainsaw, you can cut a tree down that would have fallen on your house. Lori's got a comment about raising standards of living for those who cannot afford tools or hiring somebody to fix your own. It betters the whole community. I hope what you're getting at this point in our discussion is the idea that you have Okay, I think I unmuted myself there. This is another thing. We need to advocate for better Zoom production so that it doesn't cut us off in the middle of our presentations and our discussions. Yes, everybody in favor of that. Let's work. Let's go down to the Zoom office and say, now we don't want to be unmuted anymore. Or we don't want to be muted anymore. Don't want to be unmuted either, but that's a different whole issue.
Crazy.
That is crazy. This is actually a good point. It's not in any of the slides, not something I intended to get into here, but be ready in your storytelling also for the kind of problems that we're facing this morning. For many of us who, when we first come to online interactions, the first technical thing that happens that goes wrong panics us. You have to understand the neurology of this. As you panic, the front part of your brain, the neocortex, starts to shut down. In plain English, the more it shuts down, the more stupid you become. So at the moment when we need all our faculties working best, our brain is kind of messing with us by making us get nervous. You're telling a story and something goes wrong, take a deep breath, do not panic, have a sense of humor, and work through it. Remember, unless we're doing brain surgery, which none of us should be doing because that's not what we're qualified to be doing, we're not going to be killing anybody. No puppies are going to die. No kitties are going to be harmed in this. It's just us struggling with the technology. So in storytelling, be ready for those moments when something goes wrong and find a way to work around it. And if you're doing a presentation like this, clearly Karen from CLA is there as my tech support to help troubleshoot things. And we can do that together online. But I'm primarily trying to keep my interaction going with all of you as I'm telling you about telling stories. And Karen's doing the hard work of saying, oh my God, what button do I hit back there so that we can keep going? This is the importance of prepare your stories. Know your audience. Know what affects your audience and speaks to them so they will mirror what you're doing and you can mirror their approach to be more successful as an advocate and have a sense of humor about the problems. If the problem is a minor one, like you're trying to bring up a slide and the slide simply won't come up, rule of thumb for me is if I can't get it working in 30 seconds, I forget about the slide and move on to something else. I've been in presentations where suddenly everything goes dark and I just get rid of the slide deck and keep going because I know the material. If you're telling a story and you're doing it online and something interferes with your ability to do it the way you rehearsed it, improvise, take a deep breath and draw your audience in. Don't try to hide it. You saw that in the chat and here audibly, I've been saying to you every time we hit a problem, okay, we've got this problem, we're going to fix it, we'll go on. Be transparent because that draws people into your storytelling also. If they know that you're struggling with a problem, they're going to be empathetic to you, and you might actually win empathy points from them and get even further by admitting to them that there's a problem rather than pretending everything is okay. But always focus on the essence of what you're trying to get across. In storytelling, we don't care about the tech problem unless we simply can't communicate the story because we've gone audibly invisible because we were muted. But if we can continue in any way, that's what we do because the story and the advocacy issue itself is the essence of what we're doing. Looks like we got another comment here at the very end of the chat so far. One of my favorite quotes is supporting a library story. The public library is the center of public happiness first, a public education next, from John Cotton. Dana, thank you. Wonderful reminder to all of us because it gives us a framework. And again, in storytelling, if you have a framework, a set of things that you can fall back on and a philosophy that gets you through things, then you're okay. And you're always going to have your people with you and you have the best chance possible of getting ideas across. So let me stop and look. I know there's some other chat comments. I'll go back to those in a minute, but just to keep this current and make sure I'm not doing too much lecturing here, what questions or observations do you have so far off these two kind of quick case studies that we've done of tell us a problem and how would we storytell that? Questions from anybody or comments? And if you're unable to unmute, I don't know if you can, but if you can, feel free to do that. Happy still to hear as many voices as I can in here.
I asked everyone to unmute, so I don't know what's actually going on. Okay, Karen, Quest
Yes.
is unmuted. I don't know how that happened. Only you so far.
And I'm still unmuted. Yeah, that's good. So Karen, there's two of us, there's two Karens and a me. Karen Quest, any follow-up or questions you've got, or did you just want to be unmuted?
I would just like to be muted.
Oh, you want to be muted?
Yes,
Karen,
please.
you know, if you could go on eBay, you could sell your unmutable pass to somebody else and give up what, no, I'm just kidding.
How would you price that?
That's a good question. We're advocates. How do you price the value of being able to speak in a webinar where you want to speak and buy that from somebody who doesn't want to speak but has the right to speak? Oh, it's all getting so complicated. So there are a couple of questions coming in. Salvador is asking, does writing a blog, is that a way to advocate? Absolutely. Think in terms of what advocacy means. We are promoting something that we believe in, ostensibly that we believe in, and we want to convince others to join us in that endeavor. Whether we tell a story audibly, as I'm doing this morning, whether we do it in terms of a video that we post or we put it on a blog, it's all part of advocacy. And you make a great point, Salvador, or Salvadora. I'm sorry, I got the name wrong there initially. Salvadora, the point is, as advocates, we want to take our storytelling wherever it's needed, wherever it's going to be effective. So blog's a perfect place. Somebody has asked early on, as I've referenced a couple times here, about storytelling and grant writing. And I can't emphasize enough. I did grant writing for a while, and I was lucky enough to be successful at it in some pretty significant areas. The best grant applications, the actual written stuff, was the last part of the process. The first part was talking to the granting agency or to the potential donor, saying, here's what we do. What are you interested in? And listening for what they do, rather than saying upfront, I need this from you, or my organization needs this. An initial conversation is, what are you interested in? Here's what we do. Where's the overlap? And when we identified an overlap, then we started saying to each other, if you have this much money and we can produce this, would that be of interest to you? And when they said yes, the final step was then taking what was almost a done deal and codifying that in the formal grant application. And I didn't just put facts and figures in. Whenever I had the latitude to do that in a grant application, it always started off with, This is a problem. This is generic. You'd want to certainly personalize this to a high degree. The problem is this is happening in our community. And if we could do this, the result would be this, 50,000 kids would be fed, 20,000 people would be able to walk up and down a staircase and enjoy it, getting from one part of their neighborhood to another, where they can't do that now because it's overgrown and it feels dangerous to people. There's always that thing up front that says, here's what your money would do, or what we could do together if you could support this. So it doesn't matter to me whether it's a blog or anywhere else. I think it's a great place to go. And it looks like, Salvador, to put in a link, I'm not going to chance going to that link and then be kicked out of this right now, but anybody that wants to follow it looks like it's from LA Public Library. A storyteller, Juan Reynoso, the grizzly bear, that looks great. Gosh, I want to go look at that. And that again is the kind of thing you want in your storytelling. We want to tell the kind of stories that make people say, I want to hear more. I want to know more about that. I am so moved. I want to be part of it. I want to be involved now. And again, good storytelling for advocacy should generally end with the pitch, the request, which is a basic part of fundraising too. You want to say, if you can give this, we can accomplish that. Don't just walk away saying, there could be great things in the community. You have to make that ask. Otherwise, the whole thing is kind of pointless. Like, good story. Now I'll go on and look at another story. So tell your story, be as brief as you can. I think a great story in advocacy terms is one that is around 6 or 7 sentences. That's pretty difficult. But if you can get down to the opening sentence, that is the problem, the second sentence, which is a proposed solution, a couple sentences that tell the story of the people involved, and the final one being the pitch. That's your elevator pitch you could use when you're first meeting somebody. It's a pitch you can pull out of your hat and change as quickly as possible for any given situation. And it gives you something to work with to draw people in. Longer stories, of course, if you've got the time, is great, but make sure that you're constantly thinking about the impact it has on people. And whether you're face-to-face online or in person on site, make sure you're watching people's reactions and seeing what's going on. Dorothy, you've seen a raised hand.
I was wondering if you could go over that checklist again about the criteria that you want in your 6 sentences.
Yeah, again, I'm doing this off the top of my head. I'm just thinking about the kind of things I do. So if you're watching the recording later, this may be a little bit different, but I'm thinking my first sentence, I want to state the problem clearly. I'll say this slowly in case people want to take notes rather than going back to a video. So state the problem clearly. Second sentence, state the proposed solution. People are starving in our community. If we had more money, we could give them free lunches at the library. That's pretty clear. We have these 6 children that come down here every day during the summer because their families can't afford to feed them. And they get meals here and they get exposed to library materials and they socialize because they're around other kids. That's a long sentence 3, but it immediately gets you in. And if you've got the picture behind you, or better yet, you have a couple of those kids with you in a presentation, you'd have to be pretty hard-hearted not to be moved by that. And we're back to the Goldman's thing about we want to feel, we want that empathetic push and pull that draws people into it. And the final part of it is the specific ask. So you and I together, if you can give us this many dollars, or you can give us this many meals, we will produce that effect and this community will be stronger. You don't talking in the kind of big lofty terms that people don't often talk about these days. We are so cynical. We don't want to say, you can make a difference. Like, yeah, right. We have to get past that, yeah, right. We have to get past that cynicism. And our stories and our understanding of how the mind works can help us to do that. The best advocates I see and the best advocates I've written about and things that I've published have been those people that just said, I don't like this. I want to make a difference. Will you join me? Read about Greta Thunberg years ago when she was first starting her climate moves. You know, we all know her because she's all over international media and talking at the United Nations and talking to world leaders. But if you looked into her story, that's not how she started. She started concerned about global warming, and she asked for permission to go away from school a couple of days a week and sit in front of the Parliament building there in her country, holding up a sign saying, we need to make a difference, or something along those lines. And it started grassroots with this one little kid, one adorable kid saying, my world is crumbling. I need your help to save it. And who wanted to say to a little girl, no, I'm not going to save your world. Go ahead and fry. We just are not built that way for the most part. That's the beginning of advocacy. Did that answer the question for you, Dorothy? Great. And I hope I'd said the same thing twice. I hope there were 6 different rules. Otherwise, we had 12 new rules for how to tell a story. Anybody else? Questions about this, about the process so far? While I'm waiting for anybody audibly, go ahead. Maybe we got muted again. I'm going to go back and see if there's anything back in chat that I missed so far. Lots of stuff about muting and unmuting. We'll just have to rename today's session, Muting and Unmuting in Advocacy and How You Overcome It. Please don't tread on me. Please don't mute me. See, another of the suggestions that came earlier in our conversation, we can borrow an extra set of tools. I think in this case, our kids can learn working on a project with us. Again, that was wonderful for that whole tool library thing. See if there's anybody else here. I think there was one other story that was coming through. Oh, here's a good one. I don't think we read. This was from Samantha. Economic access and entrepreneurship for underprivileged communities. Libraries can offer training on how to use the tools, and that counts as workforce development. So now we're building a case for it. Even stronger case if we can talk about somebody who borrowed one of those tools and made a difference in terms of that helped them to get a job or improve their worth. It got them more clients. We're always back to that Rio Rubin question of so what? And you take that as far as you can take that until you get to the emotional level and say, yeah, even I want to give to that. And I'm the one asking for it. And just looking over the chat. Sarah asked a question a little while ago. When is it best to use stories of an individual life affected in the context of wider community impact? Off the top of my head, I'd say when it reflects the situation of a large number of people there. You don't want to tell an outlier story that's so out there. They're saying, oh, that's just one person. There are hundreds or there's thousands of other people that don't face that. You want to look for the universal stories that can trigger that whole mirroring empathetic reaction. Sarah, does that give you something to work with? I'm in a different part of the chat, so I'm going to hope that did. Otherwise, just do a follow-up question in chat and I'll be sure to get to it. It looks like most of the other comments in there that we have already dealt with, and we got past all the muting problems for now. So Catherine is saying as a follow-up here, so the most important thing is to gather stories first. I would say the most important thing is to define the problem you're trying to solve, define a potential solution, and then start gathering the stories that prove it's a problem, and better yet, stories that show the solution in action. Great example. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. When we do go back to the slide deck, you're going to see a bunch of slides that show mosaic staircases here in San Francisco. And when I get to that, I'll explain why I use that. But the important thing there is when we were starting to do that project here in San Francisco, the first thing we wanted to do was say, we have a problem here, a very specific thing, and we think that doing this project would solve that problem. So we started to ask people, what are the problems you're facing in the neighborhood? And that helped us to build the case for the project we did. So the starting point, figure out what it is you want to change, figure out who might be most susceptible to being your partner in that, and find your early adapters in that process, and start documenting their stories at the most universal level possible. In the early stages, do not turn any stories down. You want to be in a position to always have way more stories than you're ever going to be able to use. Then you have the luxury of telling certain stories in one setting and different stories in a different one. It's the same with presentations when you're doing training, teaching, and learning, as I often do. I'll have a slide deck with a standard number of stories, but the first question that comes in that takes me off the deck is the direction I'm going to go in, because I want to respond to that person. I don't want to respond just to the deck that I thought I was going to use. We have to be adaptable there. So that's where I would go with that one. And let's see. Let's see. So the most important stories. Rose, you've got a question here. How can the library help you do that? And I'm not sure what that's referring to. Is it the collecting of stories, or it's something else? Just one of the problems of jumping around chat and trying to answer 3 or 4 questions at the same time. I'm not quite sure where I was when Rosa put that question in.
I'm sorry, I thought I meant it to everyone, like as a general question, like as when you're starting a project, to think, how can the library help you do that? So if there's anything that you're thinking that the library should bring into their realm, how can the library help you do that? So I'm just thinking of it as how you're talking about I'm sorry, I'm driving at the same time. That's why I just went to you. Just if you have that question in your mind, how can the library help you do that? It kind of thinks, well, what resources do we have already? Or what resources can we try to ask for? Just say, how can the library help you do that?
That is wonderful. So again, really good point. When you're thinking about this and you're getting your stories and you're trying to do that challenge, as Rosa says, ask yourself, how can the library be a partner in that process? And again, it takes us to we rather than I or you. That whole spirit of collaboration that comes through. All right, so we have, in spite of the muting problems, dealt with some very wonderful basic things here. Brevity in storytelling, directness in storytelling, looking for the most universal elements you can get in your stories, but having multiple stories so that you're not telling the same one over and over again, and that you have enough variety in your stories to speak to different audiences on the same topic. Or oftentimes on a broad social issue or a broad community issue, there's not just one group of people affected or not just one particular thing that fits the whole situation. You need a variety of data points there, and that's what your stories are. So collect them. Listen to the stories you hear day to day. Listen to what you hear in your communities. You move around through it. Listen to what you read in stories, as somebody said a little earlier, log stories you read, video stories that you see on YouTube or elsewhere, kind of stories you hear at city council meetings or county supervisor meetings or state legislative meetings, conferences like the California Library Association Conference, the American Library Association Conference, Public Library Association. We are inundated with lovely stories, and yet we never get tired of them. Stories are essential. They move us, and that's why we value them. Any other questions or comments up to this point? All right, let us go back, at least briefly, to some of the prep slides I've gotten. Hit a couple of major points here that tell us a little bit more about the structure of storytelling, so we know how to incorporate these things effectively into the work we do. And now we're back to slide 1. So, oh, this is really wonderful. I'm seeing on my screen now an opportunity to ask if I want to be muted. No, please do not mute me. All right, let's look at a few of the elements here. Again, as I said, when I did a variation of this presentation at the California Library Association on-site conference in Sacramento about a month ago, we're all affiliated with libraries at one level or another, so we love our books. Let's look at a few books that can help us out here. This one I love, just finished reading it. Really wonderful, dense book that is well worth slogging through. Belonging. I'm going to stop so you can see this quote about storytelling from Jeffrey Cohen. The book itself is a celebration of what makes community work. It's the whole idea that if community is going to work, people in it have to feel included, not excluded. So in our stories, we want to do that. As he says here, quoting Philip Pullman, it takes once upon a time to reach the heart. So now we're starting to build a repertoire and a foundation for ourselves. If you take the Goldman idea of mirroring, and now you move it into once upon a time reaching the heart through Cohen, we're starting to get to the idea of, as a subtitle there says, the science of creating connection and bridging divides. Your stories need to do that. Your stories need to reflect the different faces, the different voices, the different issues that your community is comprised of. And if we take to mind what Cohen explores throughout that entire book of Belonging, we can do that. So obviously, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the book Belonging, but I would highly recommend it as a resource to you. If you want to get some foundations for what contributes to a sense of community and then adapt that to your storytelling, it's just lovely, lovely material all the way through that. Another one that I'm very fond of is, no surprise, The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. Stop with a quote from him that you can read. What is advocacy if not change? Stories begin with the possibility of change. They show us how the world could be better. They show us how we can be better. That's what we want to get into. Storr's book is probably the most technical of the ones that I'm going to mention to you today. It's 4 long, wonderfully engaging sessions, and it's primarily a book for people who are trying to write fiction or trying to tell long-range stories. But I think there's a lot in there that can be adapted into advocacy. The 4 chapters that are in there are talking about creating a world, And then talking about the flawed self, when he's talking about fiction characters, a fictional character is interesting and engaging to us because they're not perfect. They have a flaw. Then there is the question of the dramatic question of what are we really trying to resolve here? And finally, there's plots, ending, and meaning. Well, that all sounds great for literature. How does that work in advocacy? Well, creating a world is looking at the situation we're in now and saying, that isn't very good. We want better. And telling the kind of story that shows people the possibility of better. They're so much better than all of us just sitting back and saying, oh, it's terrible and we can't affect anything. And so we should just put our head in the sand and hope that we don't fry in the next heat wave. We want with our stories to create a world. And Storr's book goes in loving detail about some of the ways that that works. And again, covers some of the stuff that Goldman covers also in terms of how our minds work and how we react. The more we understand that, the more effective we are. But it always comes back to a story that engages me, that intrigues me. Storr helps us to see that. In terms of the flawed self, if we can talk about ourselves as being part of what contributed to the problem we're trying to resolve, so much the better. That gives us cred. We're not talking academically or theoretically. We're saying, I was in this. Here's what I have done, and I want you to help so that we can do more of this together. We're not going out there as advocates saying we're perfect and we know all the answers. We're going out there saying, here's a problem. We need to work together. We need to brainstorm and make the commitment to change the situation. Then we get to the dramatic question, which again is something I've said in different terms already. What's the key issue we're changing here? In a novel, what's the dramatic issue that has to be resolved and how is it going to be resolved? For us in advocacy, we're asking, what's your pain point and how can we resolve it? Finally, plots, ending, and meaning. When you tell a story, you can't just meander. It has to have some kind of an engaging element that takes you from one point to another. That's what we want to keep in mind as we write these stories. And that's what Storr's book gives us. One more quote from the same book. Only I can advance the slide here a little bit. There we go. What I'm hoping is flashing back into your mind as you read that second one about the narrative. Suddenly our emotions are switched on, curiosity and tension sparked. Think back a few minutes ago when I told a very brief story of Greta Thunberg, who sat outside a legislative building with a sign. That, I think, is the kind of story that sticks with us, unless you're totally overwhelmed with everything else you hear today. When you think back on today's session, you think, what were some of the gripping stories I heard? Maybe you remember the one at the beginning about walking by and seeing somebody sitting outside a library with a laptop because they didn't have home Wi-Fi. That speaks to the advocacy for broadband. Think about the story about Thunberg sitting outside a building. That could be any one of us. We just need to look engaging and pathetic enough for somebody to say, oh, I want to help. You need help. I want to be part of your team to help you. And that's what Storr is talking about, that ignition point, that level of engagement that brings us in and says, I can't afford to say no to that. The Moth, if you're familiar with this, it's a wonderful place where you can go every week on the radio and listen, or on the internet these days, of course. Go and listen to 4 or 5 people tell engaging stories that are about 8 to 10 minutes each. Look at the quote, please, to get a start of how the Moth approaches those stories. This mirrors advice from Annie Lamott, who, if you've read her stuff, you know she's just fabulous. Probably 20, 30 years ago, she wrote a book called Bird by Bird that talked about how we write stories, how we do step by step, the creation of a story that engages people in a literary sense. She talks about creating fictional characters that are so engaging that if they asked you to go to the city dump with them, you'd say, yeah, I'll go to the dump with you. That's what we want to do with our advocacy stories. We want to lay out a problem so engaging and a potential solution that people can easily contribute to and be part of, that they say, I'll take that ride with you. And that's what the Moth people are getting at here. Stakes are what give the story urgency and energy. Make sure that there's something engaging there. And make sure that people want to take that ride with you. Again, the Moth book is wonderful. It just has story. It has excerpts from dozens and dozens of Moth stories. So you can see how somebody wrote their lead, their beginning of it. Tells you how they developed the story, what the punchline was, and the impact it had on audiences. As we look at resources like this that are primarily meant for people telling live stories on a stage or telling stories in a book or on a blog, we can adapt those. These are all great techniques. They work for writers, and we're writers and storytellers. We can do that too. We've already talked about what makes a story compelling, so I'm going to skip that particular slide. And in fact, I think I just messed things up here. Let's see if I can take us just a little bit further here. So some tips for making stories meaningful. And let's see if I can get us back to, there we go, full screen. Okay. So a few tips on making stories meaningful to the listener. Again, now we're starting to get into those ceramic tiles that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Take a look at that image that's behind me. And I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. You don't even have to bother to put it into chat. Can you figure out what that is other than a mosaic? Can you figure out the story behind it or what it's trying to show? The answer pretty clearly is no. The reason is we're not seeing enough of it. We've got a detail. Often when we start to tell stories, we get so lost in the details, we lose the big picture. So when we start off, make sure that the details we're showing are meaningful enough to be clear to the viewer. If we back off from this particular close-up of that, and now we look at the installation that's here in San Francisco out near Ocean Beach. It's out at the corner of the Great Highway and 48th Avenue, in case you want to see it. 2 ceramic tile things that are called surf henge. The artist Colette Crutcher did, I think there's 3 of them now, the picture's only showing 2. But if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you see the detail that's on the left side there. That detail by itself is pretty, but it's not engaging. When we see the whole surfboards and we realize we're by the beach and it's ceramic tiles that are very colorful, that draws us in. That's what we need to do when we're telling stories. Be colorful, be engaging, and show enough of the whole picture to draw us in. You want to make it inviting. This is one of the ceramic tile staircases I was talking about. So it's out by the Mira Loma School. Again, Colette Crutcher and Aileen Barr worked on this one together. I believe it's about 48 steps leading from a sidewalk up into an entry area to a school and a playground. And what they've done is had these colorful figures with quotes. You could sort of make out that there's writing down there, down the middle of that reddish gold plant. You see the inscription down in the lower right-hand corner telling you it's from Nelson Mandela. And it's a comment about changing the world. I maintain that when you stand at the foot of this thing, you cannot do anything but accept the invitation to read those quotes as you walk up and walk further up. It's just not the kind of thing you walk by and say, I'm going to go. That is inviting, and that's how our stories have to be. And making it actionable, there's the Mandela thing again with the words, change the world. That message is pretty clear to anybody walking up that staircase. We want to do actionable things. We talked about that at the level of saying, end your story, end your pitch, with the concrete thing of saying, here's what we need to do together. Let's stop for discussion about what we can do from that. The first part of this is going to be the question, what do you currently do to make your stories meaningful? I'm going to take a slide down. Again, I'll repeat the question. And let's talk about what you're doing and what you might do to make a difference as a result of what we're talking about today. Repeating the question, what do you currently do to make your stories meaningful and compelling to your current and potential partners and supporters? Anybody? Team from Chelsea, I give examples of goals that my learners have achieved in the past. It's wonderful. Here's what we've done. Here's what you could do too. Anybody else? Dorothy.
If I can see, if I can feel genuinely behind a problem or a concern, then I think that genuine feeling comes across and I can feel passionate about the way that I'm presenting it. And then I think that's very catching to other people. I sense more receptiveness from people when you speak from the heart.
And let's go back to the very beginning of this. Who did we hear from at the very beginning that said that in more technical terms? Remember the book Focus? Coleman. Again, mirroring. We want to be able to mirror what's out there. We want people to feel that same from us. And that's what you're describing there very effectively. Thanks. Anyone else? know I am not muted again. I'm just waiting. Salvador has your hand up. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, when I invite people to join to the conversation class, I used to use my own example. I used to tell them that I moved to Los Angeles 6 years ago from Mexico, and I started going to the free classes. I joined a library to start learning English, and now I am here talking in English, and I learned everything because when I moved, I didn't speak English.
That's wonderful. There's that total disclosure up front that tells people, I'm one of you, you're one of me, we're in this together.
Yeah, and I used to tell them, if I could do that, you can do it. Because most of the time there are people that they have been living in Los Angeles since 15, 20 years ago, and they haven't started their conversation classes, or they haven't even put a feet in a library or borrow a book or something like that.
And Salvador has just given all of us a reminder of the great ending line in an advocacy story. I did this, and so can you. That's the invitation to join us. Thanks, Salvador. Anything you want to add to that? Thanks. Wonderful explanation of what we're trying to get here. See, a couple of other things have come into the chat from Laura. Try to find out what their areas of expertise are, make a connection between their skills and the program and service we offer. It's wonderful. And the underlying thing there that we should not ignore is, in storytelling, it implies that we're the ones doing the talking. But an essential skill in storytelling is to listen. And Laura points that out. Listen to what they need so that we can feed them the kind of stories that will nourish that. Those of you that came in early before we were having the tech problems, we were having a quick conversation about what brought you to the session today and what's one thing you'd like to learn. I do that with every training session I do, any facilitated conversation I have, so that I know I'm on target with people and I can juggle what I'm going to do to more effectively respond to their needs. You can do that. It comes from collecting all those stories, listening to your audience. But we oftentimes forget this in storytelling as important as this. And I think this is where it starts. If you can meet your audience a little bit ahead of time, if you're not in a formal thing like the Moth where you go out and you tell the story on stage, but in fact, if you're working in an advocacy setting where you're going to be talking to people, show up early, be in the audience, listen to their concerns, ask them what drove them to the meeting that afternoon or that evening, ask them what they want to get out of the meeting, ask them what hurts, why they were there, and then you can tell even more effective stories than you might have told otherwise. Great points, Laura. Thank you. Looks like there's another one here. We're back to Valentine with the testimonies from patrons who have enjoyed the programs they have attended. Again, gold in the bank. Quoting our friend Deborah Doyle at the California Library Association. Bring in the civilians. They get extra points. They draw people in. It's not just us being paid to say things, which is the cynical approach to what we do and the cynical attitude toward us sometimes. But it's really showing it's not just us, folks. We're part of the community. I live here too. Kind of mirroring what Salvador was talking about, did a session for a client a couple of weeks ago where it was a grief counseling session in a workplace where they had just lost an employee who'd been with them for 36 years. And I was stunned and honored that they asked me to do that for them because I work with that company a bit, but I didn't know the employee and I'm not there that much. But they said, we know your style and we figure like you're the only person that can do this. And so I asked it over, what's my opening story there? I think I'm morning about an hour before the presentation and the conversation, it finally hit me. I started off looking out at them and saying, my father passed away a couple years ago. He was 91, had a good life. You just lost somebody that was with you for 36 years. I know what that feels like to a certain extent. Right away, we were together in this. It wasn't me lecturing them. It was me telling them a story up front of we're all subject to these terrible losses and having to deal with grief and get beyond the grief in the best way that we can. So when we're open to admitting to people what we've gone through as part of their thing, we're not making ourselves the center of the conversation. Quite to the contrary, we're drawing ourselves into it and saying, I'm part of you and let's talk. It's a really good point. Thanks, Salvador. Anybody else? Things you do right now to make stories more meaningful to your current and potential partners in advocacy? Now let's flip the question. We've done a lot of talking about what works. Let's talk about what doesn't work so that we don't do that. What are the things that you've seen done in storytelling that have turned you off in terms of advocacy? Anybody? Asking for money. And you know, Laura, I think it's how we ask for it. If we tell a story that's compelling and people want to jump in, that's beautiful. If we start off a meeting saying, hi, we're $100,000 short because we didn't budget very well last year, we need you to save our butts. That's just starting off with, why would I give to somebody who caused their own problem? We're going to ask for money. We better make sure that we have built the case for it and drawn people in and said, I'm not just asking for money. I'm asking for you to help me make a difference. The money is obviously the physical thing that is the solution there. But what we want to do is talk about the opportunity that the money provides for the community and how that's going to make things better. A really good point to make there on that. Michael says shouting. Absolutely. We talked earlier on about mirroring. You shout, they're going to shout, nobody wins. Dorothy says being disorganized or unprofessional. Absolutely. And let's be totally honest and transparent here. No matter how well organized we are, things are going to happen. Like today, we were muted and then unmuted and muted and unmuted. We have to deal with that. Unprofessional. We all have our bad moments. Unfortunately, when you're a presenter or an advocate, some people are only going to see you once. So every time is your one shot with those people and you want to be at your best. When, not if, when you make that off-color comment, when you make that comment that was misinterpreted, when you make that comment that was disrespectful, as soon as you see the gasp from the audience or you start getting the flaming messages online, don't ignore it. Cop to it, admit it, offer an apology and say, I'm sorry. That was really not what I want to present here. That's not the essence of what I'm doing. Please accept my deepest apologies and let's move on because I value our relationship and that was wrong. And then go forward. John Ronson did a wonderful book. I think it's called When You've Been Publicly Embarrassed. And he talked about worse and worse scenarios where people have said stuff that gets them into a lot of trouble and talked about how they got them out of that. Let us be prepared for that moment when we are inadvertently disorganized or we are inadvertently, momentarily unprofessional. So be ready for it and let's be honest about it, offer the apology and move on. And if people don't want to forgive us, there's nothing more we can do except to try to move on and make it up to them. But absolutely a good thing. We don't want to do that and we want to recover from it as quickly as we can. See, there's another thing here from Sarah. Frankly, if the world we presented is really different from mine, something's happening in my chat. I've only seen half the comment. Let me see if I can move that a little bit. There we go. If the worldview you presented is really different from mine, I may not feel the stakes are urgent or important. That's a good point. If you're not totally committed to the thing for which you're an advocate, you're probably not the right person to be there. And honesty and professionalism dictates that you say to your partners, I'm not the right one for this. Most of you, I think, are working full-time day jobs in your libraries, or some of us who just bounce around from organization to organization because we like the thrill of doing that. And so it may appear that the stakes are not as important to us as would otherwise be necessary, but all the great consultants and trainers I know that work for a variety of organizations up front, when they're contacted and they're asked, can you do this? We'll ask the first question, what's your pain point? What do we need to resolve there? And if we feel like the situation's not right, we'll say, you know, I can take a lot of money from you, but I can't produce the results you want. So I'm going to suggest I'm not the right person. And if you know the right person, suggest it to them. Or if the situation just smells so bad to you that you know nobody who's ethical can help them, say, I can't help you because until your organization does this, this, and or this, the kind of work I do is not going to be of benefit to you. They may not like that, but you go to sleep better and you know that you're doing the right thing. And that works for advocacy too. There are people who will take any contract, any work that they can get, and okay, you know, if that's the work they do and that's what they're being paid for, all right. But for those of us working at the level we're working with our communities, working for government, being a representative of government, representative of our communities, we need to believe in what we're doing, or we need to get somebody else in there. Is there any other comments in there? Making it very insular is another thing to avoid, as Jeffrey points out. Beverly says, when someone tells me the meaning instead of letting me come to my own meeting. Yeah, a good story should actually help us to, with great insight, see what the real issue is that we're facing and that we're trying to address. So thank you. Let's look at just a few more pointers and let's do just a little bit of workshopping beyond what we did at the beginning of this. Yeah, somebody want to say something? Did I scare you off? Scare you off. Yeah, let's go back to the slideshow. And look at just a few more pointers for how storytelling can help us. And through the wonders of Zoom, here's the whole deck that you've already seen. Ah, look at that. Been there. All right, so this one we've already covered so much that you got to make it personally. And this is where I had promised you I was going to show you a bunch of slides of mosaic tiled steps and sculptures around San Francisco. But it's not just because I like the artwork. This is where the personal part comes in. What you're looking at here is a close-up of a staircase that exists right around the corner from where I live in San Francisco in the Inner Sunset District. It's 148 steps. It's called the Hidden Garden Steps. This was originally a cement or concrete staircase leading from Kirkham up to Lawton Streets in the Inner Sunset District. It was overgrown, trees, bushes, all kinds of stuff. It was so slippery, dank, and dark that most of us that lived near the top of the staircase were nervous about walking down it to get to public transportation to go to work. For the longest time, we're all saying, something has to happen. We need to clean that up. Somebody brighter than we are decided to work with two artists to do the original ceramic tile staircase out here in the Inner Sunset District of San Francisco, called the Moraga Steps or the 16th Avenue Steps Project. And all of us like 5-year-olds were looking at that thing when it was finished, I think around 2003 or 2004, and saying, we want one of those. Fast forward, it was around 2010. Yes, it was January 2010. I was over in a local library here watching the reopening of a library. At that point, I had been working for the San Francisco Public Library System and had moved on to consulting, so I knew the staff. During the grand reopening, I saw the branch manager who knew me pretty well, and she said, do you want to meet some local artists? I said, sure. I never got past the first one, because the first one was Colette Crutcher, who had done the Moraga Steps. And like the 5-year-old I am, I blurted out the question, have you ever thought of doing another? And she blurted out the answer, I'd do another in a heartbeat. And I thought, oh my God, now we're stuck. Came back to my neighborhood with my wife, who had been there for that conversation. We're talking to the neighbor who lived at the top of the old beat up concrete staircase. I said, I met the artist from the other project. They're willing to do another one. We need to put together an organizing committee, and then we'll need to get some volunteers. We could make this work if we could spend 3 or 4 years of fundraising and working. And that led to this. So is this personal to me? You betcha. This is a staircase that made a difference in my neighborhood. And I was part of the organizing committee to help it work. And I was there start to finish to see what it took to get that going. Those kind of stories are what draw people in. As you think about all the storytelling we've done today, think of how much was packed into that story that I tried to tell in about 6 or 7 sentences there. 1, it was a story of transformation. 2, it was a story of beautiful things, as you can see from that close-up of it. 3, it was how I was involved in it and how it meant something personally to me. And most importantly, it talked about a transformation in a community that's made a difference for all of us. That draws people from all over the world. So we can sit out there on our staircase now, and it is our staircase because we had business leaders, we had community leaders, elected officials, we had nonprofit organizations working with us, and magnificent donors who all contributed to make this thing happen. As we look back at some of those slides that we've seen so far of the wonderful mosaics, it is a representation of the mosaic that goes into storytelling. It has to be beautiful. It has to be engaging. You have to have a stake in it for people to believe you. Another one that Aileen did, this is on a public transportation stop. She has, with that wonderful image of that bird going into flight, told a story that is so brief and so engaging. And I tie it back. That's why I use the title slide on this deck. Our stories have to be every bit as wonderful and briefly seen and memorable as that pelican flying across that little mosaic. Brevity is really beautiful, but it takes work to get there, and it's something we want to strive for. And finally, inspirational. I hope that as you've seen these slides and as we've talked together and shared stories, that it's made you think, I can do that too. Whether it's making a difference in your community at the level that we're talking about here, whether it's telling stories that change people's lives and provide things for them, this is what we strive for, and this is what we want to do. So let's take that down. Let me do a quick check of the clock here and see how much more time we have. You're probably faster than I am at looking at that because I have to look at yet another device to get it going. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes going. We did some initial workshopping up front. Let's return to those two stories that were in chat. Let's see if I can get that up on my screen so I can remind myself of it. And let's apply what we've talked about in this whole session and see if we can take it a little bit further. All right. Sorry about that. The joy of chat, of course, is trying to move down toward it. Oh, okay. We're back to Laura's thing about trying to get an English conversation group started. What that we have seen so far about being brief and being pointed and drawing people into it, what might we add to the story beyond what we've already developed? Any ideas from anybody? In fact, Laura, if you're game, you've had a bunch of comments here. You've had some suggestions, and certainly you've seen all the pointers that have come out of the conversation. Are you game at trying to tell a 6 or 7 sentence story in draft form right now and see where it goes? Oh, we've got the issue of muting, don't we? Let's see if we can get you unmuted. Karen, if there's a way, can you specifically unmute Laura if she can't do it herself? Oh, there, good. Hello, Laura speaks. It's like Garbo speaks.
Let's see. I guess I would want to be trying to get the volunteers who are going to run the program first, and then try and get people to come to the event. So
look at this audience and speak to us and try to convince us to join your program.
okay, so I am looking for start
Problem statement.
Problem statement, right? So our community has many people who speak many languages, Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, Russian, just to start. They are sometimes very new to our community, and they would like to practice speaking their English in a conversational setting. We're looking for people who already know English very well, and also people who would like to practice, to come together and help each other learn in a very safe setting. And
now go for the goal here in your last sentence. What's the impact on the community? Not just those learners,
right.
But what's the overall impact on the community if these volunteers help these people to speak English better?
You can help your neighbors get better jobs, connect better with their new friends and family that they're making in the area, and just communicate better in general. Maybe even if they're in a crisis situation, they'll be able to handle it without having to get an interpreter or Google to speak on their behalf.
You're almost there. The last thing I would suggest is turn it back to them and say, and you'll be able to talk to them too. And you'll discover things you wouldn't, you'll have worlds open to you that wouldn't otherwise have been open to you.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's where we want to get. Really good. Other people, quick critique. And again, when we critique stuff like this, what you want to do is talk about what you thought was really good about what she did. Any suggestions, if you were doing this, what you might add in that she could consider. I already see Terry jumping in the spirit of that. Excellent, Laura. Yay, Laura. Anybody else? Comments, what you liked about that, and any suggestions you have that would even strengthen it.
Hi, this is Karen Quest. That was good. It was really good, Laura. And it's hard to do that in front of a group. But I would say one of the great outcomes for language learning would be to strengthen community connections, and the community would have a feeling of belonging and ownership of the library.
Beautiful, Karen. That takes us right back to Jeffrey Cohen's book about belonging. That's what we want to do. Decide what makes people feel that they're included rather than excluded. We're bringing people into our community by helping them communicate with us And the payoff for us is we're going to learn more about them and be stronger because of it. Anybody else? I've seen some good comments come in here. Dorothy said, great storytelling to start with people. Chelsea saying more specific examples, like someone with an illness could speak to their doctor with confidence. A mother can communicate with their children's teachers, etc. Wonderful ideas. Again, remember, this is not just us helping Laura do her story. Everything is being suggested to Laura can apply to everybody else in this particular workshop, which is why we do it this way. We learn together. We too are part of a community of practice. And the more we strengthen that by sharing ideas and working with each other, the better off we are for everybody. Karen adds one more thing, and it would support the mission of all libraries, information for all. That, I think, is important for us to know. I'm not sure that I would put that into an advocacy thing, because we're not out there to convince them that we're great. We want to show them through our actions that this is a great place and they want to be affiliated with us. But absolutely, Karen's right on target saying in here, we should know that this is why it fits and this is why it's appropriate for us. Michael says, I agree with Chelsea, to add more specific examples would be good. Yeah. You know, Laura had 6 sentences and pretty much stayed within that. If she had 12 sentences, more examples would be wonderful. And you can do that by having people with you. You can do it with your slide deck behind you. You can do it in any way that works for you. But remember, the heart of it is the story and the engagement. Thanks, Laura, for being a good sport there. What she just demonstrated is what all of us need to get comfortable doing. If you haven't done much storytelling, it can be daunting up front. You start thinking about all the great storytellers that you've enjoyed throughout history, whose work you still have access to, and you think, I'll never be them. We don't need to be them. We need to be us. We need to tell our stories, our community stories. And as advocates, we want to tell those stories that inspire others. That's the beauty of what we're doing. That's the beauty of what we are trying to accomplish here through the Ursula Meyer Fund. I haven't said very much about that other than what you saw at the beginning, but Ursula was somebody who really believed in advocacy and training. And when the bequest was left, it got this going for the California Library Association. The commitment was, we're not just working with one set of people within a library hierarchy. Ursula wanted everybody, and that's what the donor wanted also, wanted everybody to be able to up their advocacy chops. So we do these sessions every month, we record them, we put together a pretty good sized archive right now. So if you want to do your own advocacy course, just go on YouTube, look at the California Library Association site and look for the playlist of Ursula Meyer's sessions. You'll find stuff there on the legislative process. You'll find stuff about storytelling, including this session. You'll find an advocacy basics session that we recorded about a year ago. We're going to do another one probably in September. I just this morning managed to confirm the last of the participants. We're going to do a shorter version of what the 3-hour workshop was that we had done at CLA about a month ago in Sacramento. So all this is a resource to you. Please share that with other people, encourage them to keep coming back to these things and letting us know too what we can be doing better to support you in terms of advocacy. We're nearing the end of the time we have together. Karen, don't stop the recording yet, but I will say to people, we'll do a quick wrap here with one final Q&A, and then we'll stop the recording. If there's anybody that wants to stay beyond that to ask questions where they didn't want it filmed, feel free to stay. I don't have to rush off to anything immediately afterwards. But let's think through what we've talked about today. We've talked about the idea that storytelling is an enormously powerful tool in advocacy itself. We've seen some resources like Daniel Goleman's book, Focus. We saw the mock book on storytelling, saw a little bit about the book on belonging by Jeffrey Cohen and how we can adopt that. And then the Will Storr book on the science of storytelling. It made the point over and over again that we need to be engaging. We need to focus on impacts for the community as much as us. Be aware of why the library is involved, but the real point is what we do with other people who are members of our extended community, face-to-face or online, and what I call face-to-face online interactions, what we can do to effectively draw people in. Any final questions before we cut the recording? Anybody? And I see a comment from Salvador in the chat, stories that inspire others. Yay, that's what I do on my blogs. Congratulations. Makes you want to read your blog, Salvador. Questions or comments? Almost forgot to do the thing I always do at the end of a session like this to make this real for all of you. You've gone through a lot and heard a lot right now. You're going to remember a few things. The recorded archive version, when it goes up on YouTube, will be available to you as a resource. But the killer question here is, what will you do differently in the next week as a result of having participated in today's session? Put that into chat or unmute yourself and let's see where we're going, both for yourself and to inspire others. What will you do differently as a result of having been part of this conversation? Dorothy's asking, you said this is a series, next month will be different from this session. Yeah, each month is pretty much a different topic. We've been doing it so long, we're starting like this session to get into a little bit of repeated themes, but trying to update the material. This is different than the last storytelling one I did, in that it focused more on the Goldman book and on some of the other books that are out there about storytelling. But yeah, they go on every month. Sorry, see comments come in. Let's see what we're getting here. Great. It's Terry saying, I'm going to watch more advocacy sessions on YouTube. Never forget the value of learning from those YouTube videos that are out there, not just the CLA, but many other things too. Or says, I'll keep working on my pitch so I can create a recruitment pitch. I'm sorry, again, I'm just having a little trouble with things blocking out some of the chat here. There we go. I'll keep working on my pitch so I can create a recruitment flyer for our branch. I was giving a thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to have so many people seeing these, so we know we're reaching you and actually meeting your needs. If there's anything else in there, start with stating the problem from Chelsea. Another one, collect stories from many sources. And then Catherine's asking, I have a question. When the microphone isn't working, always have, let's see, always. Oh, okay. The first part is just saying the microphone isn't working. How can I be brief but impactful? I come from a newspaper storytelling background. That's where I first got my chops up. And they teach you in newspaper writing, your first sentence has to tell the whole story in essence. What's the most important thing somebody wants to know? Second sentence gives you a backup to that. And then the third, fourth, and fifth sentences create the whole context for you. So if you want to tell stories and you want to be brief, start with what's the one point you need to make to people. And then find a way to incorporate that as an engaging tie-in to your story. Every sentence has to mean something. The joke out there about poetry, of course, is novelists hate poets because the poets get up and they start at 9 o'clock in the morning and they write 6 lines and they're done by 9:15. And novelists say, yeah, we get up and we start writing at 9 o'clock and we spend the next 3.5 hours erasing everything we wrote in the first 15 minutes until we end up with a paragraph. It is a lot of diligence. There's a lot of writing and rewriting. It's telling our stories. Great tip I picked up from a wonderful novelist that I've been lucky enough to run across is, you want to make sure your story works, read it out loud and listen to it yourself, because you'll find out where you stumble. You'll find out where your sentences are too long. You'll find yourself misreading what's on paper. There will be another word and you go, that's the word I wanted. You can fix it that way. That's another way that it helps you. Anything else in here? I always go way over my time from Catherine. Most of us do. You can tell I'm already a couple minutes over here. I'm just going to make the lame excuse of saying, well, we were muted for a few minutes, so I'm not really over time. But with that in mind, thank you all for being here. I'm going to ask Karen to cut the recording and I will stay on for some post-session description. Hope to see you in another month.